Let's talk about something that many people overlook: narcissistic kindness. At first, the phrase itself might sound contradictory. After all, kindness should feel warm, unconditional, and safe. But when kindness is filtered through the lens of narcissism, it becomes something very different: a tool, a strategy, a performance. You may have experienced it yourself. Maybe someone who constantly criticizes or dismisses you suddenly showers you with compliments. Or perhaps a person who usually withholds affection surprises you with a thoughtful gesture. In those moments, you feel a rush of relief, even gratitude, and you think, finally, they see me. Finally, they care. But here's the uncomfortable truth: this kind of kindness often isn't about you at all. It's about them. Narcissistic kindness is conditional. It shows up when it benefits their image, when it keeps you hooked, or when they sense you might be pulling away. It is rarely consistent, rarely genuine, and never truly safe. It is kindness with strings attached. Why does it feel so convincing? Because it taps into a deep human need. We all want to feel seen, loved, and valued. When someone who is often cold suddenly becomes warm, it feels extraordinary, like water in a desert. But this is exactly how the cycle works: long stretches of emotional drought interrupted by moments of sweetness that keep you from walking away. Over time, this pattern creates confusion and self-doubt. You start to question yourself: am I being too harsh? Maybe they do care. Maybe things are changing. And so you stay. The occasional act of kindness becomes enough to justify enduring the harm. But here's the cost: you begin lowering the bar for what kindness actually means. Instead of expecting consistency, empathy, and respect, you settle for crumbs, occasional gestures that only highlight how starved you've become. So how do you protect yourself? First, by naming it for what it is: manipulative kindness. Second, by remembering that true kindness is steady, unconditional, and doesn't require you to earn it. And third, by setting boundaries that remind you of your worth. You deserve kindness that is real, not kindness that confuses, controls, or keeps you tied to someone else's agenda. So ask yourself: the kindness you're receiving, does it make you feel safe, valued, and respected over time? Or does it make you question yourself and cling to fleeting moments? That difference is everything. Because authentic kindness doesn't come and go. It doesn't keep you guessing. It doesn't hold you hostage. It simply is. Kindness is supposed to be one of the simplest, most universal qualities of being human. It's what makes us feel safe, connected, and cared for. But when kindness is filtered through the personality of someone deeply narcissistic, it stops being kindness in its pure form. Instead, it becomes a paradox, something that looks genuine on the surface but feels unsettling, manipulative, and conditional underneath. This is what makes narcissistic kindness so confusing to those who experience it. You feel grateful for it in one moment, yet uneasy in the next. You want to hold on to it, yet you can't shake the sense that something isn't right. And that tension between what it appears to be and what it actually is, that is the paradox we need to unpack. When most of us think of kindness, we picture consistency. A friend who checks in on us when we're struggling. A partner who listens without judgment. A coworker who supports us without expecting credit. These are steady, predictable acts that remind us we are valued, respected, and loved. Narcissistic kindness, however, is inconsistent by design. It is turned on and off like a switch, depending on whether it serves the narcissistic person's agenda. One day, they may go out of their way to help you, compliment you, or treat you to something special. The next, they may withdraw completely, criticize you harshly, or make you feel invisible. That unpredictability is not random. It is intentional, even if it isn't fully conscious. It is how control is maintained. The paradox deepens when we realize how alluring this selective kindness can be. Imagine someone who is usually dismissive suddenly praising your work or showing unexpected tenderness. The emotional relief that floods and can feel overwhelming. You might even mistake it for a turning point, believing the relationship has finally shifted for the better. But this is where the trap lies. The scarcity of their kindness makes it more powerful than it should be. Just as a single drop of water feels miraculous in a desert, a small act of warmth from a narcissistic individual can feel monumental, even if it is minimal compared to the harm they cause. And yet, at the very moment you're feeling grateful, the manipulation is taking root. Narcissistic kindness is rarely about you. It is about them. It may be offered to repair their image after a fight, to ensure your loyalty when they fear losing you, or to create confusion so you doubt your instincts. It may even be displayed publicly to show others how good or generous they are. To the outside world, it looks like compassion. To you, it feels like hope. But beneath it all, it is a calculated move, kindness as performance rather than kindness as character. This duality is what makes narcissistic kindness so damaging. You are not just receiving a mixed signal, you are living in a contradiction. Your mind is telling you, this feels good. They care, while your gut whispers something is off. That inner conflict creates emotional whiplash. And because most people want to believe in the best version of those they care about, they end up holding on to the kind moments and dismissing the unkind ones. This is what keeps so many people tethered to toxic dynamics for far longer than they should be. Let's take an example. A partner who has spent weeks belittling your choices suddenly buys you a thoughtful gift. You're touched, you feel seen, and you think maybe the relationship is turning around. But when you step back, you realize the gift came right after you set a boundary or expressed frustration. The gift wasn't about your happiness, it was about pulling you back in, softening your resistance, making sure you didn't detach. The kindness becomes a leash, not a lifeline. That is the paradox. It rescues you only to keep you tethered to the very person causing harm. What makes this even more insidious is how it reshapes your definition of kindness. Over time, you start lowering your expectations. Instead of expecting steady care and respect, you settle for occasional gestures. You convince yourself that a small act is proof of real love, even though genuine love should never be that scarce. You begin equating unpredictability with passion, inconsistency with uniqueness, manipulation with depth. The paradox becomes your new normal, and you stop realizing how unhealthy it truly is. Another layer of this paradox lies in how it affects your self-worth. If kindness is given only sporadically, you start to wonder what you did to earn it. Did I behave better this week? Was I more agreeable? Did I avoid upsetting them? Slowly, you begin linking your own value to their approval. When the kindness shows up, you feel worthy. When it disappears, you feel small. This conditional reinforcement rewires your brain, training you to chase their affection instead of expecting it naturally. It is one of the most powerful tools of control in any narcissistic dynamic. And yet, despite all of this, narcissistic kindness can still feel real in the moment. That's why it's so effective. When someone smiles at you warmly, when they do something unexpectedly generous, it is easy to feel cared for. After all, the act itself may be pleasant, it's the intention behind it that is corrupted. And because most of us are wired to see kindness as inherently good, it takes conscious effort to step back and question the motives. It takes clarity to realize that not all kindness is safe, not all kindness is healthy, and not all kindness is real. So, how do you resolve this paradox? The first step is naming it for what it is. Once you identify that the kindness you're experiencing is inconsistent, conditional, and manipulative, the confusion begins to lift. You start to see patterns instead of isolated events. The second step is to redefine kindness for yourself. True kindness is not rare. It does not confuse. It does not make you question your worth. It is consistent, steady, and unconditional. And finally, you protect yourself by setting boundaries. You decide that sporadic gestures are not enough to keep you in harm's way. You remind yourself that you deserve kindness that feels safe every single day, not just on the days when it benefits someone else. The paradox of narcissistic kindness is that it looks like care while eroding care. It feels like love while undermining love. It promises connection while creating disconnection. But once you see it clearly, the paradox collapses. You no longer mistake scarcity for value. You no longer confuse performance for authenticity. And most importantly, you no longer accept conditional gestures as proof of your worth, because real kindness does not confuse you, test you, or trap you. It doesn't make you cling harder to the one hurting you. Real kindness, in its pure form, is consistent. It is safe. It is free, and that's the only kind of kindness you truly deserve. When people look back on their experiences with narcissistic relationships, one of the most common reflections they share is this: the kindness felt so real. And in those moments of warmth, generosity, or tenderness, they truly believed it was genuine. That is why the confusion runs so deep. If it was fake, why did it feel so good? If it was manipulative, why did it feel like love? This is where psychology gives us answers. Because the reason narcissistic kindness feels so real is not just about the act itself, but about the context in which it arrives, the human needs it touches, and the way our brains are wired to respond to inconsistent reinforcement. Imagine a person who withholds affection most of the time, criticizes often, or leaves you feeling unseen. Then suddenly, without warning, they soften, they say something kind, they offer help, they show affection. In that moment, your body reacts powerfully. The relief you feel is magnified by the contrast. If you had been receiving kindness consistently, the gesture would simply blend into the background of everyday life. But because it has been scarce, the experience is amplified, almost intoxicating. This phenomenon is what psychologists call intermittent reinforcement, and it is one of the most powerful forces in conditioning human behavior. It is the same principle that keeps people addicted to gambling. The rare, unpredictable wins feel exhilarating precisely because they are unexpected. Narcissistic kindness works the same way. Its unpredictability makes it feel more valuable than it really is. That feeling of value is not imaginary. Your brain literally floods with chemicals like dopamine when you receive unexpected rewards. So when someone who is usually critical suddenly praises you, it lights up your reward system. It feels exciting, validating, and deeply emotional. This is why the kindness feels so real. It's not just an idea, it's a neurochemical reaction happening inside you. And because our brains are wired to seek more of that reward, you begin to crave their kindness even more, which keeps you attached to the relationship. You are not weak or foolish for feeling this way. You are human, and your nervous system is responding exactly as it is designed to. Beyond biology, there is another reason this kindness feels authentic. It often mirrors what we imagine love should look like. Many narcissistic individuals are skilled at observation. They notice what makes you light up, what makes you feel seen, and they are capable of delivering it with precision. They may know the exact words you long to hear, the gesture that touches your heart, or the timing that feels perfect. When they offer these things, it doesn't feel fake. It feels deeply personal. It feels like they understand you in a way no one else does. But what you must remember is that understanding and authenticity are not the same thing. They may understand what you want, but that doesn't mean their intentions are pure. And yet, even with that truth, the emotional impact cannot be denied. In that moment of kindness, you do feel loved, you do feel safe, you do feel chosen. That's why the memory of those moments stays with you so strongly, even when the relationship becomes painful. You find yourself holding on to the kindness like proof, replaying it in your mind, using it as evidence that the person truly cares. And because the emotional impact was so powerful, it overshadows the cruelty or neglect that may follow. This is one of the central reasons people stay in these dynamics longer than they should. The kindness doesn't just feel real, it feels unforgettable. Another layer to this illusion comes from our own yearning for hope. Human beings are natural optimists when it comes to relationships. We want to believe that people can change, that love can grow, that difficult seasons can turn around. So when narcissistic kindness shows up, it aligns perfectly with this desire. You interpret the kindness as a sign of progress, proof that things are improving. You tell yourself, this is who they really are, and the rest was just stress or circumstance or temporary. In other words, you rationalize the cruelty but cling to the kindness. Hope makes the kindness feel not only real, but defining. It is also important to understand that narcissistic kindness often has a level of intensity that ordinary kindness does not. It can be grand, dramatic, or deeply flattering. Instead of a quiet show of care, it may be an extravagant gesture, a sweeping compliment, or a sudden declaration of devotion. And because of its intensity, it feels unforgettable. This is not by accident. Such moments are designed to leave a lasting imprint on you, so that even in times of doubt, you will recall the dramatic kindness and convince yourself that it represents the person's true self. At the same time, part of the reason it feels so real is because of the vulnerability it awakens in you. When someone has hurt you repeatedly, your defenses go up. But when they show kindness, those defenses drop, even if only temporarily. And in that space of vulnerability, you feel closer to them than ever. This closeness feels genuine, but it is built on a cycle of injury and repair, harm and healing. It is not the closeness of consistent love, it is the closeness of relief after pain. The difference matters, but in the moment, it is almost impossible to distinguish. Another psychological factor is our natural tendency to believe what we see. When someone performs an act of kindness, we instinctively trust it. Our social conditioning teaches us that kindness equals goodness, that generosity equals care. We rarely stop to question the motives behind it because doing so feels cynical. And so we accept it at face value. Narcissistic individuals benefit from this instinct. They know that when they are kind, most people will not question the authenticity of the gesture. And that unquestioned acceptance makes the kindness feel even more convincing. Ultimately, the reason narcissistic kindness feels so real is because it is real in its immediate impact on you. The hug feels warm. The words sound sweet. The gesture does touch your heart. But what is not real are the intentions behind it, the consistency of it, and the safety it promises. The act may be real, but the meaning you attach to it is where the illusion lies. And so the challenge is not to deny that the kindness happened. It did. The challenge is to place it in context. Was it consistent? Was it unconditional? Did it last? Did it leave you feeling safe over time? Or was it followed by neglect, criticism, or harm? When you ask these questions, the illusion begins to fade. You realize that what felt real was actually fleeting, that what felt safe was actually unstable, and that what felt like love was actually part of a cycle. Kindness that comes and goes is not kindness. Love that confuses you is not love. Care that makes you question your worth is not care. The reason it felt so real is because you are wired to respond to kindness, because you are human, because you wanted to believe. But once you see the pattern, you no longer have to be fooled by it. You can honor the feeling it gave you, but refuse to let it bind you, because the truth is simple. Real kindness does not just feel real in the moment. It proves itself real over time. When we talk about narcissistic kindness, the most important question to ask is, why are they doing this? What is the purpose behind their sudden warmth, their unexpected generosity, or their carefully timed words of affection? Because while genuine kindness has no agenda, narcissistic kindness almost always does. And understanding this hidden agenda is crucial because it allows you to step out of confusion and see the pattern for what it truly is. When someone who is usually critical, dismissive, or emotionally unavailable suddenly shifts into being attentive and generous, it is rarely random. It is a strategy. And that strategy often serves one of several purposes: control, image management, or self-preservation. One of the clearest agendas behind narcissistic kindness is control. Think about it this way: if someone criticizes you often, makes you feel small, or pulls away emotionally, they weaken your sense of security. Over time, you become desperate for reassurance, longing for moments of softness and connection. Then, when they finally give you that kindness, it hits you powerfully. You feel relief, validation, even joy. And because of that, you become more compliant. You stop pushing back, you forgive their earlier behavior, and you allow the cycle to continue. The act of kindness becomes a reset button, just enough to keep you invested, just enough to make you stay. It's not about making you feel valued for your sake, but about keeping you within their orbit, ensuring you remain tied to them emotionally. This is kindness not as love, but as leverage. Another agenda is reputation or image management. Narcissistic individuals often care deeply about how they are perceived by others. They want to be seen as generous, caring, admirable, or even heroic. So their kindness may appear in public or in situations where it can be witnessed and praised. To outsiders, this person looks remarkable, loving, even selfless. But behind closed doors, you may experience a very different version of them. This is what makes it so hard for others to believe your story when you try to explain the truth. They've seen the public kindness, the performance, the curated image, and they assume that must be the real person. The agenda here is clear: their kindness is a tool to build admiration, protect their reputation, and make sure no one questions their behavior. You become part of the performance, whether you want to or not. Then there is the agenda of self-preservation. Narcissistic individuals often fear abandonment, even if they mask it with arrogance or superiority. So when they sense that you are pulling away, when they notice your energy withdrawing, or when you start setting boundaries, they may suddenly turn on the kindness. They do this not because they recognize their mistakes or want to grow, but because they fear losing their source of validation, attention, or control. The kindness becomes a way of pulling you back in, reminding you of the bond, and convincing you to stay. This is why so many people describe experiencing sudden warmth and affection right when they were about to walk away. It feels like a breakthrough, but it is often a tactic. The timing itself is the giveaway. The kindness doesn't come because you are loved unconditionally. It comes because your absence threatens their control. Sometimes the agenda is even more specific: punishment and reward. Narcissistic individuals often use a system of conditional approval to keep people around them off balance. When you do what they want, they reward you with kindness. When you resist, they withdraw it or replace it with criticism. Over time, this conditions you to shape your behavior around earning their approval. You become less of yourself and more of what they want you to be. In this way, kindness is weaponized. It is not about connection, but about training you to comply. The agenda here is not love, it is domination. There's also the agenda of self-image. Many narcissistic individuals struggle with an internal sense of inadequacy, even if they never show it outwardly. By performing acts of kindness, they reinforce their self-concept as a good person. They may genuinely believe they are kind and generous, but only when it suits them. In this sense, their kindness is not for you at all. It is for themselves. It allows them to silence any internal doubts, to reassure themselves of their goodness, and to deny the impact of their cruelty. When they are kind, they can point to it later as evidence. See, I'm a good partner. I do care. I'm not the problem. The agenda is to protect their fragile self-image, not to nurture your well-being. The agenda behind the act also shows up in cycles. If you look closely, you may notice that kindness often appears right after conflict, criticism, or distance. This is not accidental. It is part of the cycle of idealization and devaluation that defines many narcissistic dynamics. They push you away, they create pain, and then they swoop in with kindness to patch the wound. You may mistake this for reconciliation, but in reality, it is just part of the pattern. The kindness is not about healing the relationship, it is about maintaining the cycle. It ensures you remain invested enough to endure the next round of hurt, because you are holding out for the next moment of relief. The most painful part of understanding this agenda is realizing how little the kindness actually has to do with you. You may feel deeply touched by their gesture, but when you look closely, you realize it was never really about meeting your needs. It was about meeting theirs. Whether the goal was control, image, or self-preservation, the kindness was designed to serve their agenda. This doesn't mean the act itself didn't feel good. It doesn't mean you were foolish for appreciating it. It means the meaning behind it was different from what you assumed. And that realization is painful because it forces you to grieve the gap between what you wanted and what you actually received. But here is where clarity becomes powerful. Once you begin to see the agenda behind the act, the confusion starts to fade. You stop asking yourself, why did it feel so real if it wasn't? And instead ask, what was the timing? What was happening right before? What did they stand to gain? These questions cut through the illusion and allow you to see patterns that once seemed invisible. And once you see the patterns, you can no longer be so easily trapped by them. It is not easy to accept that someone's kindness may not be pure. It goes against our instincts, our hopes, and even our values. But when you realize that narcissistic kindness often has an agenda, you take back your power, you learn to separate the act from the intention. You learn to enjoy the feeling of kindness without attaching deeper meaning to it. And most importantly, you learn to expect more because real kindness doesn't serve a hidden purpose. It doesn't arrive only when convenient. It doesn't depend on your compliance. It flows freely, without strings attached, without calculation, without performance. The agenda behind narcissistic kindness is what makes it hollow. But the moment you recognize the strategy, you stop mistaking it for love. You stop holding on to it like proof. And you start freeing yourself to seek the kind of kindness that doesn't need an agenda at all. The kind that is consistent, unconditional, and truly safe. When people describe their experiences with narcissistic relationships, one of the most common themes is this sense of contradiction, moments of warmth that feel profound in the short term, but an overarching sense of confusion in the long term. It's a cycle that pulls you in and pushes you away, comforts you only to unsettle you later, and leaves you doubting what is real and what is not. This is the essence of short-term warmth leading to long-term confusion. It is the emotional rhythm that keeps so many people stuck in dynamics that harm them, unable to walk away, even when they know deep down that something is wrong. In the short term, the warmth can feel like a lifeline. Imagine weeks or months of coldness, criticism, or distance, followed by a sudden act of kindness. Maybe it's a compliment that catches you off guard, a gentle tone you haven't heard in a long time, or a gesture that makes you feel remembered and seen. The impact of this moment is powerful precisely because of the contrast. When you have been starving emotionally, even a small crumb of care can feel like a feast. You may feel a rush of relief, as though the person you once fell for has finally returned. You may think, this is the real them, this is proof they care. That sense of warmth, though fleeting, can feel intoxicating. But here's the problems. Those moments are rarely sustained. The warmth is temporary, often disappearing as quickly as it arrived. Soon after, the old patterns return: criticism, withdrawal, manipulation, or indifference. And you are left trying to reconcile the two extremes. On one hand, you have the memory of their kindness, the part that felt safe and validating. On the other hand, you have their cruelty, neglect, or volatility. Holding both in your mind at once creates cognitive dissonance, a state of inner conflict where your brain struggles to make sense of two opposing realities. That dissonance is not just uncomfortable, it is deeply destabilizing. The confusion that grows out of this cycle is not accidental. It is one of the most powerful effects of narcissistic dynamics. When someone alternates between warmth and coldness, between kindness and cruelty, you can never find solid ground. You don't know what to expect, so you become hypervigilant, constantly scanning for clues, always second-guessing yourself. Was the kindness real? Did I do something wrong to make it stop? Should I wait for it to come back? This uncertainty keeps you emotionally hooked because your mind is focused on solving the puzzle rather than recognizing the pattern. And as long as you're stuck in confusion, you're less likely to walk away. In the short term, the warmth feels good. It gives you hope, calms your fears, and makes you believe the relationship has potential. But in the long term, it erodes your sense of reality. You start questioning your own judgment. You wonder if you're being too sensitive, if maybe the coldness was your fault, or if perhaps the kindness is the truest reflection of the relationship. This doubt becomes exhausting. And over time, you lose touch with your instincts because every time you try to trust them, the cycle pulls you back into uncertainty. Another layer of this confusion is how the short-term warmth can rewrite your memories. After a painful fight or period of neglect, a kind gesture may lead you to reinterpret what just happened. You may tell yourself, maybe it wasn't that bad. Maybe I overreacted. Look how loving they can be. The kindness reframes the cruelty, making it easier to minimize or dismiss. This rewriting of your own story keeps you stuck because you're no longer trusting your lived experience. You're letting temporary warmth color the entire narrative. Over the long term, this cycle doesn't just confuse you about the other person, it confuses you about yourself. You may start to feel that you are difficult, needy, or unworthy of consistent kindness. Because the warmth comes and goes, you assume it must be tied to your behavior. If only you could be better, calmer, more agreeable, maybe the kindness would last. This is how the cycle slowly erodes your self-worth. It trains you to believe that love must be earned, that kindness is conditional, and that inconsistency is normal. The long-term confusion is not just about the relationship, it is about your identity. What makes this so painful is that the short-term warmth does feel real in the moment. The hug feels genuine, the smile feels comforting, the words sound sincere. And in that moment, you are not wrong to feel touched. The act itself may be real, but what is missing is consistency. Real love is not proven in flashes, it is proven in patterns. When kindness appears only sporadically, when warmth is used to patch up harm rather than prevent it, it ceases to be genuine. It becomes part of the manipulation, even if the person offering it doesn't fully realize that's what they're doing. This is why people in narcissistic dynamics often describe feeling like they're living two different relationships, one when the warmth shows up and another when it disappears. The problem is that most people desperately want to believe the warm version is the real one. They cling to it, nurture it, and convince themselves that if they try hard enough, it will become permanent. But the reality is that if the warmth is not consistent, it cannot be trusted. The long-term confusion is the proof. It's also important to recognize the toll this takes on your body. Living in a cycle of short-term warmth and long-term confusion keeps your nervous system on high alert. You are constantly waiting, wondering, and bracing for the next shift. This stress doesn't just affect your mind. It impacts your sleep, your health, your energy, your entire sense of well-being. The cycle is not just emotionally harmful, it is physically draining. And the longer it goes on, the harder it becomes to break free, because your body has adapted to the rhythm of unpredictability. The real tragedy of this cycle is how it distorts your sense of what love should be. Over time, you may start to equate love with confusion, believing that uncertainty is part of passion, that volatility is part of depth, that inconsistency is part of human imperfection. But this is not love, it is conditioning. Real love may not always be perfect, but it is steady. Real kindness may not always be dramatic, but it is consistent. The warmth that matters is the warmth you can count on, not the warmth that appears only when it serves someone else's purpose. Short-term warmth will always feel good, and that's why it's so effective. But when it leads to long-term confusion, it is not a gift, it is a trap. The key to breaking free is to stop measuring relationships by their best moments and start measuring them by their overall pattern. A relationship is not defined by a single kind act. It is defined by the consistency of care, respect, and empathy over time. If the warmth doesn't last, if it doesn't make you feel safe, if it leaves you more confused than secure, then it is not the kind of warmth you deserve. The cycle of short-term warmth and long-term confusion is one of the most powerful dynamics in narcissistic relationships. It binds people, disorients them, and erodes their ability to trust themselves. But once you see it clearly, the spell begins to break. You stop mistaking moments for proof. You stop letting temporary comfort erase lasting harm. And you start demanding the kind of warmth that doesn't just show up sometimes, but stays with you through all seasons. Because in the end, the love and kindness you deserve is not the kind that confuses you. It is the kind that frees you. There is always a cost when we accept less than we deserve, but the cost of accepting conditional kindness is particularly heavy. At first, it doesn't seem like a cost at all. In fact, it feels like a blessing. Any act of kindness, no matter how inconsistent, feels like proof that love exists, that care is possible, that the person can meet your needs. But when kindness comes with conditions, when it is doled out only when convenient, strategic, or self-serving, it begins to chip away at you slowly, almost invisibly. Over time, the toll becomes undeniable. It impacts your self-worth, your mental clarity, your emotional safety, and even the way you see love itself. The most immediate cost is the erosion of self-worth. When you accept kindness that is conditional, you begin to believe that you must earn love. Instead of seeing yourself as inherently worthy of care and respect, you start tying your value to whether or not the other person approves of you in that moment. If they are warm, you feel valuable. If they are cold, you feel invisible. Slowly, your sense of worth becomes dependent on their mood, their approval, or their recognition. This dependency traps you in a cycle of striving, constantly adjusting your behavior, your words, even your identity, in hopes of securing more kindness. You stop living freely and begin living reactively, always chasing crumbs of validation. Another cost is the way conditional kindness rewires your expectations. At first, you may know in your heart that love should be steady, consistent, and safe. But after enough time in a relationship marked by conditional kindness, you start to lower the bar. What would have once felt unacceptable begins to feel normal. A kind word after weeks of criticism feels like a breakthrough. A rare gesture of care feels like deep devotion. You tell yourself that the inconsistency is just part of the relationship, part of life, maybe even part of love. This shifting of expectations is subtle but dangerous because it trains you to settle for less than you truly deserve. And once you have adjusted your definition of kindness, you may carry that distorted standard into future relationships, never realizing how much your perspective has been reshaped. There is also the psychological toll of confusion. Conditional kindness keeps you in a constant state of uncertainty. You never know when the next kind gesture will appear, so you stay on edge, hypervigilant, scanning for clues. This constant mental effort is exhausting. It leaves you drained, anxious, and preoccupied. You cannot relax because you never know where you stand. And this confusion bleeds into other areas of your life. Your work suffers because your mind is elsewhere. Your friendships weaken because you are emotionally depleted. Your health deteriorates because your body is living in stress mode. The cost is not just emotional, it is holistic, touching every corner of your life. Perhaps one of the most heartbreaking costs is the way conditional kindness distorts your relationship with trust. In healthy relationships, trust grows through consistency, through knowing that someone's words and actions align, that they will show up for you again and again. But when kindness is conditional, that trust never forms. Instead, you live in doubt. You begin to question your instincts, to distrust your own perceptions. When they are kind, you wonder if you imagined the cruelty. When they are cruel, you wonder if you imagined the kindness. Over time, you lose faith not only in them but in yourself. This erosion of self-trust is one of the deepest wounds conditional kindness leaves behind because it makes it harder to walk away, harder to heal, and harder to believe in love again. Conditional kindness also teaches you dangerous lessons about boundaries. Because the kindness is unpredictable, you may begin to tolerate more disrespect than you otherwise would. You convince yourself that enduring the bad is worth it for the occasional good. You start to excuse harmful behavior because you're waiting for the next kind gesture to balance it out. This erodes your boundaries, making it harder to say no, harder to stand up for yourself, harder to demand better. And once your boundaries have been worn down, it becomes even easier for the cycle to continue unchecked. The cost here is not just your self-respect, it is your ability to protect yourself. Another hidden cost lies in how conditional kindness reshapes your idea of intimacy. Real intimacy is built on safety, vulnerability, and trust. But when kindness is conditional, intimacy becomes something else. It becomes fear-driven. You may find yourself opening up only when you believe it will be rewarded, hiding parts of yourself when you fear rejection, or tailoring your vulnerability to what you think the other person wants. This creates a counterfeit intimacy, one that looks close on the surface but feels fragile underneath. The result is that you never experience the deep, secure connection that true intimacy offers. Instead, you live in a half connection, close enough to keep you invested, but never close enough to feel safe. There is also the cost of time. Every moment spent in a dynamic defined by conditional kindness is time you could be investing in relationships that are mutual, safe, and real. But because conditional kindness keeps you hooked, you may stay far longer than you should, and by the time you recognize the pattern, months or years may have passed. This realization often brings its own grief. The grief of wasted time, of missed opportunities, of life spent chasing scraps instead of building something whole. The regret can be heavy, but it is part of the toll that conditional kindness exacts. Even after leaving such a dynamic, the cost lingers. Conditional kindness leaves scars that shape how you enter future relationships. You may become overly cautious, distrusting kindness even when it is genuine. You may flinch at generosity, wondering what strings are attached. Or you may cling too tightly to new partners, fearing the loss of kindness you still believe must be earned. The residue of conditional kindness can follow you long after the relationship ends, unless you consciously work to unlearn it. Healing requires relearning what love really is, redefining kindness, and reclaiming your right to expect consistency. Ultimately, the cost of accepting conditional kindness is that it robs you of your ability to experience the real thing. It keeps you tied to illusions instead of truths, crumbs instead of meals, performance instead of authenticity. It steals your clarity, your peace, and your freedom, and the longer you accept it, the deeper the toll becomes. The kindness may feel good in the moment, but the aftermath always carries a price. But here's the hopeful truth: once you see the cost clearly, you can stop paying it. You can decide that conditional kindness is not enough for you, that you will no longer trade your worth for crumbs, that you will no longer let temporary warmth justify lasting harm. You can raise your standard back to what it should have been all along, expecting consistency, expecting respect, expecting love that doesn't confuse you or make you prove yourself. Because the cost of accepting conditional kindness is far too high, and the reward of holding out for the real thing is immeasurable. Protecting yourself from conditional or manipulative kindness begins with one simple but powerful act: awareness. You cannot guard against something you cannot see, and so the first step is recognizing when kindness is being used as a tool rather than an expression of genuine care. This is not always easy, because kindness in any form feels good in the moment. A compliment, a favor, a gesture of generosity. These are things that our hearts naturally want to receive. But the key is to look beyond the surface and ask, is this kindness consistent? Does it show up even when it doesn't serve the other person's agenda? Or does it only appear when they want something from me, when they fear losing control, or when they want to look good to others? Protecting yourself begins with asking those questions honestly, without sugarcoating the answers. Once you've named the pattern, the next layer of protection is setting boundaries. Boundaries are not walls to keep everyone out. They are filters that allow in what is safe and keep out what is harmful. When someone offers you kindness with strings attached, your boundary is what prevents you from being hooked into the cycle. It might look like saying no to a favor that comes with guilt, or refusing to allow someone's occasional niceness to erase a larger pattern of disrespect. Boundaries remind both you and the other person that kindness must be consistent and authentic in order to matter. The act of setting these limits can feel uncomfortable, especially if you've been conditioned to equate boundaries with selfishness. But the truth is that boundaries are not selfish, they are self-respecting. They signal to the world and to yourself that you are worthy of steady, reliable care, not conditional attention. Another way to protect yourself is by redefining what kindness actually means to you. When you've spent enough time receiving conditional kindness, your internal compass can get distorted. You might start believing that love is supposed to come in cycles, that long stretches of indifference punctuated by rare warmth is normal. To recalibrate, you need to ground yourself in the reality of genuine kindness. Real kindness does not confuse you. It does not require you to perform or prove your worth. It shows up even when no one is watching, even when it's inconvenient, even when there is nothing to be gained in return. By holding this definition close, you create a standard that conditional kindness can never meet, which makes it easier to spot and reject. Protecting yourself also requires rebuilding trust in your own instincts. One of the most damaging effects of conditional kindness is the way it makes you doubt your perception of reality. You may second-guess your feelings, wondering if you're being too harsh or too sensitive. But your gut often recognizes patterns before your mind is ready to admit them. The discomfort you feel when someone's kindness feels hollow or manipulative, that discomfort is data. Learning to honor that data instead of dismissing it is crucial. You protect yourself by listening to the quiet voice inside that says, "This doesn't feel right," even when the surface looks fine. Over time, honoring your instincts strengthens your self-trust, making it harder for manipulative kindness to pull you back in. Support systems are another essential form of protection. Isolation is where conditional kindness does its deepest damage, because without outside perspective, it's easy to normalize toxic patterns. By sharing your experiences with trusted friends, mentors, or therapists, you gain clarity. Others can often see patterns you've become blind to. They can remind you of your worth when you're tempted to settle. They can hold you accountable to your boundaries when you feel the urge to compromise. Surrounding yourself with voices that affirm your reality and your dignity is one of the most powerful shields against manipulation. There is also the protective practice of slowing down. Manipulative kindness often thrives on urgency. It pressures you to respond quickly, to be swept up in the moment before you've had time to think. Slowing down allows you to pause, reflect, and separate the gesture from the agenda. For example, if someone suddenly becomes overly generous after weeks of neglect, instead of immediately feeling indebted or relieved, you take a step back. You ask yourself, what else is happening right now? Why might they be acting this way? Does this kindness feel aligned with their usual behavior, or does it feel like a performance? Giving yourself time creates space for discernment, and discernment is protection. Protecting yourself also involves practicing detachment from outcomes you cannot control. A person who offers conditional kindness may react negatively when you stop accepting it on their terms. They may withdraw, criticize, or attempt to punish you for not playing along. This is where you must remind yourself that their reaction does not define your worth. Your goal is not to change them or win their approval, but to protect your own peace. Detachment means recognizing that you are responsible for your own standards, not for someone else's behavior. It is about letting go of the illusion that if you just try harder, they will become genuinely kind. Protecting yourself requires accepting that you cannot force someone to give what they do not have the capacity to give. Another powerful layer of protection is self-compassion. It is easy to look back on times when you accepted conditional kindness and feel shame or regret. But shaming yourself only weakens your ability to move forward. Self-compassion reminds you that you accepted what you were taught to accept, that you were doing your best with the knowledge and tools you had at the time. Instead of blaming yourself, you choose to learn from the experience. This gentleness with yourself strengthens your resilience, making it easier to demand better going forward. Self-compassion becomes a buffer against the guilt and self-doubt that manipulative dynamics often plant inside you. Finally, protecting yourself means making a commitment to authenticity in your own life. You model the kind of kindness you want to receive, kindness that is steady, unconditional, and rooted in respect. You surround yourself with people who live by those values, and you cultivate an environment where love feels safe rather than transactional. In doing so, you create a life where conditional kindness cannot thrive because it has no space to take root. Your commitment to authenticity becomes your ultimate shield, drawing you closer to relationships that nourish you and away from those that drain you. Protection, in this sense, is not about building a fortress of fear. It is about building a foundation of clarity, boundaries, self-trust, self-respect. It is about knowing what real kindness feels like and refusing to settle for anything less. And when you live from that place, conditional kindness loses its power over you. It no longer hooks you, no longer confuses you, no longer makes you doubt yourself. Instead, you see it for what it is, a performance, not a gift, and you walk away knowing you deserve more. Because the ultimate protection is not just rejecting what harms you, but choosing what heals you, what honors you, and what allows you to thrive,